Accessibility. Accessibility is very good. Shout out accessibility. The ability to easily understand something pretty quickly is not just good, but a very important part in keeping people safe, like road signs, for instance. Even if you give it just a super quick glance, you're able to tell what it's saying in just a split second, and that split second when you're on the road can be the difference between life or death. That's because accessibility is an overall universal good. Mostly. Because when accessibility is applied to more abstract art forms, the waters get just like a little bit more muddy. Like at first glance, you might think that the more accessible a song is, the better of a song it's gonna be, but boy is that not further from the case. If you've ever made the mistake of not pressing the Bluetooth button fast enough when you start your car, or you have to go into a Walgreens or just a grocery store, the radio just bombards you with the safest, most formulaic, absolute nothing burger of a song you've ever heard in your life. Is every single artist making songs for Kohl's commercials? Is that what's going on? What the fuck is happening? How are there so many songs, and how come all of them sound like their sole purpose is to play in the background of a JCPenney's? What happened? Oh my god, an artist like Calvin Harris and David Guetta just spoon-feeding the public the tamest, softest, most nothing radio-friendly electronic songs you've ever heard in your life. Sound design, especially in electronic music, has gotten just so insanely complex and amazing and interesting and galaxy-brained, and these idiots over here are just spoon-feeding you guys the exact same 4 chords as everyone else using a synth preset that sounded dated back in 2012. Is it accessible? Sure, but it's also like offensively stagnant. Super accessible music might sound like the best kind of music possible on paper, but the end result is usually just shy of royalty-free music, and no one likes that. And that's because accessibility, the quality of being easily understood or appreciated when applied to everyday life, is good, but when applied to things like art, sometimes too much accessibility can strip away anything interesting about it. So I wanted to talk about it. It's an extremely interesting scale that I haven't heard anyone else discuss, and it's just full of gray areas and pros and cons, and sometimes artists will like shift on the scale throughout their music career, and I just find it really fascinating. So I decided to make an entire green screen video essay just rambling about it for a few minutes, so I hope you enjoy. So we've already touched on this side of the spectrum a little bit, but now it's time to talk about this side of the spectrum. Stuff that is so fast, so harsh, so extreme, so past the point of being easily understood or appreciated by the general public, and if you can't tell by looking at me for a single second, I really like this kind of stuff. I think it's neat. Because although stuff like this will never be playing inside of a Walgreens, when you meet someone else and you find out that they listen to Death Grind or, I don't know, Lil Texas, there's an immediate personal connection there. Because what inaccessible music lacks in wide appeal, it gains in creating niches and subgroups. Plus, it's just cool to have little moments of, we're both annoying! Oh my gosh, we're both annoying music nerds, cool! But the single most inaccessible music genre humanly possible would most likely be, say it with me now, harsh noise. Very little can top it considering it's like specifically designed to be inaccessible and weird and harsh. But you can make some harsh noise premises a little bit more accessible by leaning into the electronic aspect a little bit more, adding some repetition and some basic recognizable song structure. The next thing you know, you got plenty of hard electronic artists that don't sound too far off. And might I add, having some mainstream success from it. Is this harsh noise? No, of course not. The presence of all these things immediately disqualifies it, but it's not terribly far off, especially to your average listener. You're never gonna see a harsh noise set at EDC, obviously, but seeing artists like these play shows like these to crowds of this size playing music like this is really fascinating, because it just goes to show that just with a few basic song elements, harsh noise principles can immediately become way more accessible to way more people. Visual aesthetic also plays a role in this, however, because if a harsh noise artist released this, I doubt anyone would bat an eye. Most regular people would look at it, listen to it, and go, ew, gross, not for me, right off the bat. But if the artist just looked a little bit more obnoxious and went by the name DJ Crazy Dick and added a bunch of lights and colors, then all of a sudden a bunch of rave bros would find it kind of interesting, which I find fascinating. But shifting gears for a bit, one thing that I find extremely fascinating that might even warrant its own video by itself is comedy music. Comedy music is somehow spread throughout the entire spectrum, being at different points at the exact same time. On one hand, everyone loves to laugh. That makes it really accessible, but on the other hand, comedy songs, although funny, aren't necessarily considered as good as serious songs, so it becomes a little bit less palatable. Like, as much as I love hearing Reggie Watts improvise a song about movie theater etiquette, What kind of psychopath would play this at a party? That would be insane. Within comedy music, there is a secondary level of accessibility that can be easily shown by artists like Weird Al and early Bo Burnham. Since neither of them necessarily sound earth-shatteringly amazing, it is fairly easy to replicate their sound with a little bit of effort. And don't get me wrong, both of these guys are extremely vocally capable and have proven it time and time again. It's just that I don't think anyone can argue the fact that most people can sing along to a Weird Al song and sound pretty decent. If you can talk, you can sing along passably well, thus giving it an underlying boost of accessibility. But if you try and sing along to something like Adele or Mariah Carey, you're gonna sound ridiculous. You can't hit those notes. You're punching way above your weight class, and therefore that makes it a little bit less accessible in a way. And speaking of music that is kind of spread throughout the spectrum, ambient music is, in my opinion, the most ultra-accessible form of music possible due to its soft, universally appealing nature. It's not bound by language, nor does it require any sort of technical proficiency in any sort of instruments. It's just pure vibes. But at the same time, it is still considered a little, weird socially somehow. The general consensus among regular folks is that it barely even counts as music. Until it wins an Oscar for Best Film Score. Then it counts all of a sudden. People will say that it's so goddamn boring until it's, playing at a wellness retreat that rich people spend thousands of dollars to go to. Then all of a sudden it becomes a transcendent experience magically. Ambient is one of the most versatile and therefore most accessible genres to exist, but much like a blank or relatively plain canvas, it can surprisingly invoke a lot of harsh reactions from people at the same time. But enough about that. Do you want to know what the opposite of ambient music is? Extremely fast stuff. The more speed, the more inaccessible the song is. It's just science. If you bump up the BPM high enough, you will lose most sane people at a certain point. Viscera Infest drummer makes me feel like I'm gonna pull a muscle just watching him. It's truly insane. And they may be fast, but Archspire, on the other hand, every single instrument, including the vocals, is going as fast as possible, not just the drums. And whether you like them or not, you gotta admit the dedication to fit a whole album's worth of notes into just a single song. That's some dedication right there. The draw of inaccessible music isn't just a community thing, however. A lot of weird or harsh music is usually genre pushing in some way, or is implementing some sort of sound design that hasn't been tried before, so even if you don't like it, you're gonna experience something brand new if you try out something super inaccessible, and there's value in that. And sometimes you can even spot artists or trends coming a mile away before they pull an Elvis and become mainstream. And speaking of Elvis, sometimes weird, scary, inaccessible music can shift and become accessible with time. Like how Elvis was somehow the most provocative thing ever at one point, but now he's something that only weird old women are obsessed with and no one else. Elvis has found himself on nearly every point on the scale at least some point in time due to his music changing or society changing. And I know that this is an absolutely insane comparison to make to Elvis, but Death Grips is way more socially accepted today than they were 10 years ago. If you would have told high school me that Death Grips tickets would sell out too quick, be too expensive, and be in too large of a venue, I would have laughed in your face. Back in 2015, it was just weird people that liked Death Grips, but now it's just 3 of your coworkers. Obviously, they're not Elvis level or anything insane like that, but my point is that even an artist as weird and generally off-putting as Death Grips can shift upwards on the scale of accessibility. But since we're on the topic of artists that are extremely popular despite their sound, Knocked Loose. My god, their growth is borderline exponential. How did we get from here to here? Dude, what the fuck happened? Somehow their success didn't come from watering down their sound at all. Their accessibility lies solely in just how damn good they are. I remember Knocked Loose pre-laugh tracks, and throughout all of high school, just seeing more and more fellow students get into them despite having no interest or ties to hardcore, at all. But they just have so many riffs and pre-breakdown vocal callouts that are specifically designed to be catchy and stick in people's heads. Much like a lot of watered down radio metalcore, only without sacrificing any of the heavy, which I didn't really know was possible, frankly. This is a prime example of an artist slowly sliding up the scale a little bit solely based on talent and not making compromises, and the end result speaks for itself. Alternatively, however, using a very similar yet completely different example, we have Code Orange. They had a very similar starting point as Knocked Loose. They were hardcore, they were heavy, they were surprisingly accessible despite their sound, and they were growing in popularity with every single year. I remember watching Youth Code open for them back in 2017 at Kilby Court, which is just literally a garage, and the show was so violent, that it literally made headlines. This particular injury sparked a lot of debate in the hardcore community over GoFundMes and whatnot, and I saw this happen 1 foot away from me, right here, physically, in space, and that's not an exaggeration. There was so much full throttle violence in such an enclosed space that you never would have guessed that same band, flash forward to 2023, is just kind of butt rock now. You can't really blame them for watering down their sound, considering they had some mainstream partnerships that put them in front of more casual music fans, so it's the smartest move business-wise. But it's just fascinating how both of these bands had the same starting point and ended up on the same point of accessibility, but in very different ways and with very different receptions. Knocked Loose made their way up by remaining heavy and really good, and Code Orange made their way up by watering it down a little bit. And although they are still a larger, more noteworthy band, if you look at their fan reception, not a lot of people are happy with it. There's this false notion that underground music fans just outright hate success, and although I think that is true sometimes, I think that's a massive oversimplification. A lot of people, myself included, don't hate success, they just hate the watering down and the potential corniness that comes with or inspires success. But as long as these two things don't rear their ugly heads, people love it when a band that they love succeeds. In conclusion, I don't know, man, I just found accessibility in music to be kind of fascinating, and no one else was talking about it. Are there different inaccessible music genres that I failed to talk about? Absolutely. Is accessibility completely depending on personal taste, and that's different from person to person, so trying to talk about it objectively is kind of an impossible task? Also, yes, but I don't really care. I thought it was interesting. I wanted to make a video on it, and I didn't want to make a video that was so insanely long that it takes forever to make, so I'm keeping this one brief. Anyways, subscribe if you want, follow me on stuff if you want, share this video if you want. That helps out a lot, specifically. I'll have some new merch soon, so stay tuned for that. And I don't know, hopefully you got something out of this video, because it was just mostly a lot of word vomit. And that's it. Thanks for watching. See you later.